winning isn't magic, it's math, but solving these problems isn't magic. Voting is medicine. It's what we take to keep ourselves going. It's how we make things better. It's what medicine does. It makes you better. And so voting is medicine.
Hi everyone, it is Sally Holmes, Marie Claire's editor-in-chief. I'm talking to Stacey Abrams, who is our April cover star. Leader Abrams, so lovely to see you. I've been thinking so much today about everything that went into the story and the cover shoot and our mood going into it. You know, I was on the phone with your team, our creative team, the day before the shoot, and the results of the Georgia runoff were just kind of being confirmed. Everyone was so excited. Of course, that was January 6th, and later that day, you know, a mob stormed the Capitol and it turned into a very scary day. Although, as you said in the cover story, not surprising. Just thinking back on that, what was your mood that week with, you know, such a moment and then this terrible thing happening? And what is your mood like today?
So I always frame it around the fact that while I was born in Wisconsin, I can never leave that out. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Mississippi, where for my entire childhood, the state flag was the Confederate flag. I moved to Georgia with my family when I was 15. And while it wasn't the full-blown Confederate battle emblem that was the Mississippi flag, Georgia had a similar flag. And I'm the daughter of civil rights activists. You know, my dad studied history. My mom was a political scientist. So I knew what it meant to have this banner as part of the state's announcement to the world of who they are. Mm-hmm. It was always about traitors, about people who risked their lives to keep my ancestors enslaved and who tried to venerate those domestic terrorists. And so, you know, the week of January 5th, you know, the Monday before, we had the visit from the former failed president and President Biden. On Tuesday, we had this extraordinary election where people of all races and all regions turned out, where we had, you know, record turnout from Black rural voters, which is something that people often forget about when they think about rural communities. And we had youth participation at unheard of rates in a runoff election, in a Senate election in January. And we went to bed that night knowing that, or I went to bed knowing that both Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff were going to go to the US Senate. I woke up the next day to the confirmation, and I was on the phone with my dear friend, Nikema Williams, our newest Congresswoman, and she was cowering in her office because of the invasion, because of the insurrection. And there can be no surprise that people who would engage in that level of vitriol, who would celebrate, and in fact would declare that we are a lost nation because they didn't win the Civil War, those who would lift up domestic terrorists as models, that they would engage in that behavior themselves. But what I refuse to do that day, what I refuse to let us do any day, is to let their terrorism succeed. Because when they can terrify us, when they can scare us out of owning our success and celebrating our victories, when they can try to ruin a day that sent the first Black and the first Jewish senators from the state of Georgia, that's when they have been the most effective. And I refuse to give them that power.
Today, you know, reflecting on that moment now that this is 2 months later, what is your mood like? What does your attitude look like as you look forward?
Well, again, grounding it where I live, for every success, we have new challenges. And so, yes, we had record turnout from communities of color across the country. We had record turnout of young people. And yet the response to those elections, the response to Kamala Harris becoming the first Black, the first Indian, the first woman to be vice president, the reaction was what we are seeing today, which is this retrenchment, this return to the last time so many people of color had the audacity to try to own their power, and that's Jim Crow. And what we're watching, it's happening right now in 3 states, in Georgia, in Arizona, and in New Hampshire today, the day after Bloody Sunday. We have state legislatures that are trying to pass bills that would restrict access to the right to vote, limiting it so dramatically that communities of color and young people will be pushed out of the narrative and pushed out of the conversation and the power that is America.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we just passed the American Relief Act, and that happened because we didn't let them succeed in defeating our voices. And so I don't plan to let them succeed this time, but it's going to take a lot of us doing a lot of hard work. And I encourage everyone to follow me on Twitter and look for ways that you can help.
So you just mentioned this COVID relief bill. Georgia obviously played a crucial role in moving that in the Senate. What was that moment like for you?
Again, it's a reaffirmation of why the right to vote is so important. There are those who see voting rights as the celebration of an act. I see it as the celebration of opportunity, because it's when you vote that you get to put people in place who actually see your needs and do something about it. COVID isn't new, but it took the election of John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to ensure that we had relief that actually solves terrible, intractable problems in our nation. We are going to lift millions of children out of poverty. We are going to help millions of working families get access to the retirements they deserve, retirements they thought they may have to delay and deny because of this. We are going to see schools reopening, children who've been missing out on meals because they couldn't go to schools, not because schools didn't want them there, but because the infrastructure didn't allow their presence to be safe. And so we are seeing action. We are seeing opportunity in action. And that's why it's so exciting to me that it wasn't just about this promise of $1,400 extra,
Right.
Total of $2,000 checks. It's the promise that we will see problems in our nation and that we can trust that we can have an effective government that will respond when it's right.
So, I can hear the passion in your voice and the drive. One quote I loved in our cover story was, "This isn't magic, this is math." Can you talk a little bit about how you find that motivation? And, so many people told you this is impossible. What you're trying to do is not possible. How did you keep going and find that conviction and drive?
Because I'm pretty good at math. I mean, look, when I joined the state legislature in 2006, I was elected in 06, and at the end of an election cycle, before you go into the next legislative cycle, in Georgia, all of the legislators, all of the constitutional officers, we go to Athens, Georgia, to the Vincent Institute, where we talk about the role of government. It's one moment of unity, or at least of shared information. And I remember there was, I think it was at the 2006 biennial, there was a conversation about demography. And in that conversation, before I get fact checked, it may have been the 2008 one, but it was in that early period. There was this conversation about just how dramatically Georgia was changing, and that the change was going to create these ripple effects in our politics and in the needs of our state. And I remember looking at that thinking, I'm coming in, into the minority. There is no clear path out of the minority, but there is a future that we can see. So we may not see how we get there, but we can see it. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was, okay, I see the problem. We're the minority. I see the opportunity. We are going to eventually have the numbers. My job then is to figure out how do you connect the dots. And that's what I spent the next 11 years doing. 4 years as a legislator and 7 years as leader. And then I ran for governor.
And what about a year like this year that is, an off election year? It's not a midterm, it's not a presidential election. What is, how do we keep that fight going and keep pushing for change?
Well, first we need to fight for democracy, because apparently they don't like it. And I'm going to be really clear. The Federalists were back at the inception of our nation, the Federalists engaged in voter suppression. They basically said only white men who own property will be allowed to vote. It took a while to start to change all that. Basically from Reconstruction until 1965, it was Democrats, mostly Democrats in the South, who were the reason that we had Jim Crow. They engaged in vicious and unadulterated voter suppression. And for the last 20 years, and primarily since 2008, when we had this black guy who became president, President Obama, we have seen Republicans use voter suppression. The reason I raise that is that protecting our democracy isn't a new challenge. It's one we keep winning at. It takes a long time, it takes lives, but the better we get at it, the shorter the periods of ignominy are. And so we're in a moment where we can do a lot more, because we're in a moment where everybody is once again talking about voter suppression, but it's not this distant thing that only happened in the 1960s to Black people.
Right.
It's happening in New Hampshire today to white Republican students who happen to live out of state and want to be able to vote in their state. It's happening to Latino voters in Arizona and to Native Americans in Arizona. It's happening to Black and brown voters here in Georgia. And so what we can do is, one, realize that it's not just about electing people, it's about protecting elections themselves. And so if you go to my Twitter feed, I just did a thread and I will tell you how you can stay on top of what's happening. There are 253 bills across 43 legislative bodies. We can stop these bills, or at least make it really, really painful to pass them. That's number one. Number two, we need to pass the For the People Act. It came out of the House of Representatives last week. It's sitting in the Senate, and there's a companion bill called SR1 that's the Senate version of it. We need to fight for that bill's passage, because yes, you're going to hear about the filibuster, but we've got to make sure we've got everyone in line, because the filibuster is the last hurdle. We can't assume we don't have other hurdles. So make sure people know that you want this bill to move. Number three, we have to have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. That's going to follow HR1, SR1, but it's going to be an important piece. And the last thing I'll remind people of is that most of us live in cities where there are elections. Atlanta has elections this year. Missouri has elections this year. We know New York has an election, so I've heard. You know, across the country, there are municipal elections happening, county elections in some places. So pay attention, because so much of what happens to us does not happen in Washington.
Right.
It happens here. And the last thing I'll say about it is this: when I ran for governor and people said, well, why aren't you running for, federal office? I ran because I believe that we have to make progress, that there are changes that have to be made. And what I remind people of is that Stand Your Ground was not federal law. It's state law passed by the legislature of Florida, signed by the governor of Florida. Mass incarceration did not start in 1994 with the crime bill. It started in the 1970s under Governor Ronald Reagan. The evisceration of the social safety net didn't happen with the 96 Welfare Act. It began in Wisconsin with Republican Governor Tommy Thompson. And Jim Crow never had a single federal law, and it changed lives for multiple generations. What happens locally affects us just as much as what happens nationally. And so we can't take our eye off of local politics. We've got to be willing to look in both places. And this is the year to focus on our local elections, so that we're ready, and we're using that muscle memory, so we're ready when the midterms happen in 22.
Do you have advice for resources for people to look into what those elections, or, the things that they can really do in their local communities that would make a difference?
So Indivisible is an amazing organization that's done a really good job. It's not in every state, but it's in most states. If you go to fairfightaction.com, you go to our web, or fairfight.com, go to our website, we can tell you about the work that's being done on fighting back against voter suppression. If you look at the Brennan Center, you can learn more about what's happening and just how these laws are affecting our lives. And then look at your local city council. I would actually do the homework of checking to see, has your city council passed a budget, and what does that budget say about how they intend to treat those families that have been disproportionately harmed by COVID-19? They're about to get a whole bunch of money. That's what that $1.9 trillion. You'll hear Republicans say that it was a boondoggle and it didn't directly affect families. Well, I know that my family is affected not just by the money we have in our pockets, but by the money we've got to pay out in taxes, because the city and county and the school board, they don't have the monies they need. So pay attention, follow the money, and make sure that money is being invested in the needs that we have. It's not for everyone to run for office, but the most chilling statement I hear is when people say, I'm not into politics. Because I want to say, you may not be into politics, but politics is into you.
Right.
And it's coming for you if it knows that you're not going to do anything to fight back.
So again, you have so much passion and drive. How do you personally fight burnout?
Number one, I give myself permission to rest. I'm terrible at sleeping, so don't take that part of my advice. I'm working on it. But I love television. I love pop culture. I love the arts, and I love the ability to tell stories in multiple ways. So I am personally supporting all of the streaming services. I've got a subscription to all of them because
Same. It's terrible.
but for me, and that's the thing. It's a good thing. It is something that feeds my soul. I subscribe to multiple newspapers and to magazines, but I also let myself watch TV, and I do not begrudge a moment of that. I read everything that I want to read. I read, haughty and very, very esoteric novels. I read romance. I read science fiction. I read the things that are on the 100 books you have to read before you die. And I read the things that are just fun. And it is, but what's so important about that for me is that I don't feel guilty about it. I've got to decompress. I've got to let my mind get a break. Because when you truly worry your mind with the troubles of the world, you've got to make sure it doesn't overwhelm you and you become one of those troubles. And so one is just give yourself permission to take a break. Two, give yourself permission to be angry, but always make sure that anger is fuel and not something that's draining you. And there's a difference. Anger that just burns you up from inside, it devours who you are. I believe in sending my anger forth. And whether it's creating an organization or becoming impassioned about a candidate, but I always make certain that I give my anger action as opposed to letting it burn me up. And then the other piece is, share your interest, but don't make everyone around you a slave to your passions. And what I mean by that is I have friends who care about things I care about, and I have friends who do not care about them at all. I will occasionally nag them into doing something, and they'll do it generally because I try to space out my asks. But I have people around me who aren't involved in everything that I'm involved in because I need a respite. And so do they, because we have to assume that the people in our lives are also overwhelmed and engaged. So we can be, a source of energy and compassion and silence for one another without trying to convert everyone. Don't turn your passion into a cult project.
Can I ask you what you're watching right now to relax?
Yes, I am watching The Equalizer, the series with Queen Latifah, which is really good. But I'd never seen the original movies because they came out during election years.
Oh, wow.
So I went back to watch them, and I love them. And Antoine Fuqua, if you're watching this, I need number 3. I'm watching Lupin, which I find just a lot of fun. And I'm watching Guy Fieri's Tournament of Champions because I love his cooking shows. He's just awesome.
I'm also guilty of, I'm a great British Bake Off person. That is my relaxing. I could watch it. My husband doesn't approve, but I would watch them over and over just to have that certainty. I find it very comforting.
Absolutely. It's bucolic, and you learn about, treacle tarts.
Yes, I could pretend like I could actually do it, but I've spent all the time watching it, so I have no time to figure it out. It's better that way. Who is someone else who is doing a great job at voting rights and representation work who doesn't get the spotlight enough?
Lauren Groh-Wargo.
Hi, Georgia. Hope you've had a great holiday season. Well, you might be wondering what to do if your absentee ballot hasn't arrived yet.
Lauren is the CEO of Fair Fight. She has been my consigliere, my partner in our fight for democracy. She and I met 10 years ago. And every time I hear people give me credit, I appreciate it, and I accept it as it's intended. I want people to know that this young woman from Ohio has been as committed to this work and has done so much. And there's so many people who have to operate in that space of doing that, yes, I serve as an avatar and as an engine for this, but I want to lift her name up every time because she is someone who would never ask for that attention, but is so committed and is so deserving of not just accolades, but just gratitude. And she always has mine.
Is there another woman that inspires you every day?
I mean, it's hokey, but true. My mom. My parents are raising my 14-year-old niece. My parents are 72. And they remember not only before there was an internet, they remember before there were personal computers. And they are, quarantined. Basically, they're staying safe at home with a 14-year-old who is a child of technology.
Yeah, on the TikToks.
Exactly. And my dad is actively involved, but my mom, she is someone who endeavors every single day to be the best kind of person. And she raised me and my three sisters, but as well as my two brothers. She raised us with my dad to believe in our capacity to do good, to believe that it's our responsibility to care, and that it's okay to lose and to be sad, but it's not okay for that to be the last thing you do and the last thing you feel.
That's so nice. I love that. Before I let you go, because you are being so generous with your time, I have to ask you a couple of questions from the readers, the fans, who submitted them to Marie Claire. Let me look at this. One of them is, will we ever get a memoir?
Not if I can help it. No, I mean, look, I'm so Lead from the Outside and Our Time Is Now. I of course tell parts of my story because my editors and my agents both convinced me, Libby Burton and Linda Lowenthal and Sorana Jones all convinced me that I had to tell more of my story for it to work. Okay, they're fine. They were right. But a standalone memoir is not something that I'm that interested in. It's, I love the work we were able to do with All In the Fight for Democracy, but my co-producers, the directors of the film, kind of kept it from me that they were going to make me the centerpiece, because I said explicitly, I want to do this documentary because I don't want there to be a documentary about my race. They did not listen because they are smarter than I am and they did a much better job. But I say all that to say this. I've met me. I'm pretty good with who I am. If I can tell my story as a way to create a new narrative and help people navigate things better, I'm all in. No pun intended. But the notion of just a standalone one is not terribly appealing.
Okay, heard it here first. Another question was, what else do you want to accomplish in your career?
Oh, there's some other jobs out there. I'm waiting to see if we still have a democracy first, but I'll be right.
That would help. What helped you find motivation after a setback?
Remembering why I did it in the first place. Something I think people often forget is why, and that's why I talk about the fact that you have to know what it is and how you're going to do it, but you always have to know why, because when it falls apart, if the why was strong enough, it gives you the strength to try again. But if the why was weak or never existed, then it'll either crush you or you'll drift away from it.
What is the most urgent thing people can do to help secure the vote in 2022?
Make certain you are paying attention to your state legislatures. They are meeting in almost every single state right now. They are making decisions about your future. Whether you are a teenager, they're deciding whether you will get to participate in elections. Some states are even deciding if you count when they're making the decisions about representation. They're going to be making decisions about the schools you can attend, about whether your college tuition goes up or not. They're going to be making decisions for young women. They're going to be deciding what you can do with your body and where you can do it. And if you are older, they're deciding how you can raise your family and what choices you get to make. There is no part of our lives that state legislative decisions don't touch, but they are often the least examined, and that's why they are so important.
Okay, this will be my last question. This is from me, my own fan question.
Yes.
What are you most looking forward to in 2021?
I'm enjoying a very heady time of not having to make really big decisions. And I intend to prolong that time for as long as possible.
That sounds very nice and important for rebuilding and rejuvenating. So I'm happy for you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again for this phenomenal cover that we're all so excited about and proud of. I can't wait to get my hands on it in April. And thank you for spending the time today.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you to Ashley Ford for writing such a generous piece. Thank you for picking me and for letting me wear really awesome clothes.
They were very awesome clothes. I will
really
say
were.
that. You looked awesome.
Thank you.
I'm like, I have to get my hands on that Tom Brown jacket because that was it's a good jacket.
Yeah, nice.
Well, have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for speaking with me.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.